the smell of roasted herbs was still hanging in the air when the first crack formed inside me. I remember the soft clatter of silverware, the warm glow of the dining room lights, and the way my own home suddenly felt like a stage where I no longer existed. In that moment, watching myself fade into the background of a life I had poured everything into, something inside me went cold and painfully clear. If you've ever felt yourself disappearing in a room full of people you love, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. These moments happen more quietly than we admit. I didn't know it then, but that quiet fracture at my own dinner table would be the beginning of the truth I had avoided for years. Let me show you how it all began. I still remember the way the room felt that night, heavy and unfamiliar, even though it was my own home. I had spent the entire day cooking, setting the table just the way Lucas liked it, hoping for one quiet evening where I could feel like a part of my own family. Instead, I found myself standing there, frozen, as my daughter-in-law brushed past me and spoke about me as if I weren't even in the room. It was the way she dismissed me so casually, as though my presence added nothing, as though my effort meant nothing, that struck the deepest part of me. What hurt even more was the silence that followed. My son's silence, the quiet agreement that came from him choosing not to see me. In that moment, something inside me cracked in a way I couldn't hide from myself anymore. I felt the humiliation settle into my chest, not loud or dramatic, but sharp and steady, like a truth that had finally grown tired of being ignored. I stood there wondering how I had become someone who blended into the background of her own life, someone who could set a full table and still feel invisible at it. That night didn't just sting, it woke me. It forced me to face the possibility that this moment wasn't an exception, but the culmination of years I had quietly erased myself. And that realization was the beginning of everything that came next. There was a time when giving felt natural to me, almost like breathing. When Lucas was born, it was just the two of us, and I poured everything I had into making sure he never felt the absence I carried. I worked long shifts, sometimes 2 jobs at once, coming home after midnight only to wake up again before 6. I stitched our life together with whatever strength I had left, telling myself that love meant endurance. It meant sacrifice. It meant putting him first. Always. As the years went on, I didn't notice how much of myself I was setting aside. Every choice I made, every promotion I turned down, every dollar I saved for his school supplies instead of my own needs, felt like the right thing to do. I thought I was building a future where he would feel supported, grounded, safe. Somewhere along the line, though, I became the background to his life, the quiet figure who made everything possible without ever being seen. When he met Carrie, I remember feeling hopeful. I wanted to believe that all the years of holding things together might finally ease, that maybe I could share the weight with someone who cared about him as deeply as I did. But slowly, I realized that my role never changed. If anything, I shrank even further. I became the person who picked up the slack, who adjusted, who folded myself smaller so their world could fit comfortably around them. Looking back now, I can see how all those years of giving didn't just drain me. They erased pieces of me I never thought I could lose. And that is why the moment at the dinner table cut so sharply. It wasn't new. It was the final echo of a pattern I had ignored for far too long. And on the night everything finally broke, I could no longer pretend I didn't feel it. I barely slept that night. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that dinner until the silence in the house felt heavier than the humiliation itself. I kept asking myself how long I had been pretending not to notice the way I was fading into the background. How many moments I had brushed aside, telling myself it wasn't worth making a fuss. That love meant patience. That being overlooked was just part of getting older. But as the hours drifted past, I felt something shifting inside me, something I could no longer push down. By the time the sky began to lighten, I knew I couldn't stay. The thought didn't come with anger. It came with clarity. A steady, painful truth that if I didn't walk away now, there would be nothing left of me to salvage. So I got up quietly, moving through the house I had poured my life into. I packed only what truly belonged to me, things that held pieces of who I used to be. My hands shook when I picked up the keys, not from fear, but from the weight of finally choosing myself. I set them on the counter, knowing that my absence would say more than any words ever could. And then I walked out. No dramatic goodbye, no final plea, just a quiet exit from a life that had stopped seeing me. As the door closed behind me, I felt the first breath of something I hadn't felt in years: possibility. When I first stepped into my aunt's old apartment, the air felt still in a way that unsettled me. It was small, quieter than any place I had lived in years, with sunlight slipping through thin curtains that carried the faint smell of dust and forgotten time. I set my bag down and listened to the silence, realizing how unfamiliar it felt to be somewhere that didn't demand anything from me. No footsteps to anticipate, no voices to brace myself for. Just stillness. Those first days moved slowly. I made simple meals, not out of habit, but because it was all I had the energy for. I slept on the old pull-out couch, waking before 7 each morning with the nagging thought that someone might call. But the phone never rang. Not from Lucas. Not from anyone. That absence settled into me like a second silence, confirming what I had feared all along, that my leaving didn't disrupt their world the way it disrupted mine. To keep myself from getting swallowed by the quiet, I started writing. Just a few lines at first. Small truths I had ignored for too long. Pieces of myself I wanted to understand. The pen felt awkward in my hand, but it grounded me. It reminded me that I still existed outside of what I had given. As the days passed, the apartment began to feel less like a stranger's space and more like a place where I could hear my own thoughts again. And in that quiet, I started to notice things I had never allowed myself to see, signs that something about my old life didn't add up. I didn't know it then, but I was on the edge of a truth that would change everything. Something went wrong while generating the response. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help@openai.com. Retry. The first time I saw Daniel, I felt something inside me shift so suddenly that I had to steady myself. I walked into his bookstore, telling myself I was only curious, only trying to understand the life that had been lived without me. But when he looked up, when his eyes met mine for the briefest moment, there was a warmth there that felt painfully familiar. It was the kind of warmth I used to imagine my son might give me one day, back when I still believed love naturally grew in the spaces where you offered it. I didn't speak to him that day. I couldn't. I just wandered through the aisles, pretending to look at books while watching him from the corner of my eye. Every movement he made felt gentle, steady, grounded. I noticed the way he listened when customers spoke to him, how he didn't rush them, how his smile softened the room without him even trying. Over the next few days, I found reasons to return. Sometimes I didn't even step inside. I would stand across the street with a cup of coffee, watching through the window, letting myself memorize the shape of a life that should have been familiar to me all along. The ache of those missed years pressed hard against my ribs, but it came with something else too: hope, fragile and trembling. Eventually, I allowed myself small interactions, asking about a book, thanking him for a recommendation, nothing that revealed the truth sitting heavy in my chest. But each exchange felt like opening a door I had never known I was allowed to touch. And every time I walked away, I couldn't stop comparing his natural kindness to the distance I had lived with for so long. I didn't know what would happen next, but I could feel my old life beginning to loosen its grip on me. After I stepped away from that house, I told myself I was done looking back. But the truth is, part of me needed to understand what my absence meant. So I watched quietly from a distance, not out of spite, but out of a need for clarity. It didn't take long to notice the cracks forming in the polished image Lucas and Carrie had worked so hard to maintain. Missed payments, ignored notices, small signs of strain they could no longer hide behind curated smiles. As I dug a little deeper, I realized how much of their stability had been resting on me. The bills I used to cover, the groceries I quietly paid for, the hours I spent holding everything together. Without that support, their world began to tilt. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like a structure built on uneven ground, finally giving way. When I met with a lawyer to reclaim the house, I felt a calmness I didn't expect. The deed had always been in my name, but taking it back felt less like revenge and more like reclaiming a part of myself. Their panic when they learned what was happening didn't shake me. For the first time, their emotions weren't mine to carry. Instead, I felt a quiet certainty growing inside me, a sense that I was finally stepping into a life where I didn't have to disappear to keep the peace. And as their world continued to wobble, mine, fragile as it still was, began to feel more solid beneath my feet. I knew the next step would demand even more honesty, but I was ready to face it. I spent days trying to steady myself, rehearsing words I never imagined I would have to say. Every time I stood outside Daniel's bookstore, I felt that familiar tremble in my hands, the one that came from wanting something so deeply it scared me. Part of me wanted to keep the truth tucked away, to protect both of us from the pain it might bring. Staying silent would have been easier. It would have kept my world small, predictable, untouched. But the more I tried to push the truth aside, the louder it pressed against me. I kept remembering the years I had swallowed my voice, the years I convinced myself that endurance was the same thing as love. And for the first time, I understood that silence had cost me almost everything. I wasn't willing to lose anything more, not with Daniel. So I opened my notebook and began writing down everything I needed to tell him, letting the truth settle into words that felt both terrifying and freeing. I wasn't doing it to reclaim the past. I wasn't trying to fill the years we lost. I was choosing honesty because I finally believed my voice mattered. The morning I decided to tell him, the fear didn't disappear. It simply stopped controlling me. I walked toward the bookstore, knowing that whatever happened next, I was stepping into it with my whole, unhidden self. And with each step, anticipation grew, because this conversation would rewrite everything. When Lucas finally reached out, his voice carried a confusion I had expected, but the desperation underneath it caught me by surprise. He wanted to understand why I had pulled away, why I had taken the house back, why I seemed like a stranger to him now. Hearing that uncertainty from him stirred something in me, but it wasn't enough to pull me back. It only reminded me how many years I had waited for him to see me at all. As I listened, memories rose up like a tide. The countless moments I had stood beside him, offering support he never noticed, shrinking myself so he could feel bigger, quieter, more comfortable. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done trying to earn a place in a world that had never made room for me. When I finally spoke, I let my truth settle between us. I told him what it felt like to disappear piece by piece, to give until there was nothing left to give. I didn't accuse him or demand anything from him. I just named the weight I had carried for so long, the weight I no longer intended to lift. Walking away from that conversation felt strangely peaceful. It wasn't a victory, and it wasn't revenge. It was closure. The quiet kind that comes when you stop fighting for someone who was never fighting for you. As I turned toward the life ahead of me, I felt the faintest pull toward something new, something tender and uncertain. And in that small pull, I knew the next chapter was already beginning. When I walked into the bookstore that morning, I thought it would be like every other visit, quiet, steady, comforting in its own small way. But Daniel greeted me with a softness that felt different, almost deliberate, as if he had been waiting for me. He reached behind the counter and held out a small, wrapped package, saying only that he thought I might appreciate it. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside was a worn, leather journal, the kind that seemed made for someone rebuilding their life one careful word at a time. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten note about how the world feels less heavy when we have a place to set our thoughts down. His thoughtfulness struck me so deeply that I had to look away for a moment just to steady myself. It wasn't the journal itself. It was what it represented. A beginning. A quiet invitation to belong somewhere. A recognition I had spent years longing for without ever saying it out loud. Standing there in the soft light of his bookstore, I felt something warm open inside me. Gratitude. Yes, but also relief. An easing of a weight I had carried for far too long. And in that moment, I realized my story wasn't ending. It was just turning toward a gentler chapter. Looking back on everything I have walked through, I can finally see how far I have come. I spent years disappearing into the needs of others, convinced that love meant giving until I had nothing left. But losing myself was never the answer. What saved me was the moment I chose to listen to my own voice, even when it trembled, and the courage to step toward a truth that reshaped my entire life. I learned that it is never too late to begin again, never too late to choose worth over silence, and never too late to open your heart to something new. If my journey taught me anything, it is that healing often starts with one small act of honesty. If you have ever felt unseen or forgotten, I hope my story reminds you that your life still belongs to you. Share your own journey in the comments. I would be honored to hear it.